So we're kind of going to start with a fireside, kind of back and forth with Jay. He's built a pretty incredible company in a very short space of time, and then we're going to open it up to the floor to all of you, and hopefully you can kind of continue the conversation, and then after that we can break for some networking. So. Yeah, I'd love an update. Give me some of the numbers.
Yeah, so always great to be back in Ireland. Ireland was our second country after our home in the UK. So 20% of the Irish population at the end of last month had used Hailo, been downloaded 500,000 times, most popular downloaded travel app in recent history. Right now we have about, I think 15,000 registered drivers in 20 cities across Ireland. I was in the West Country in Galway and actually managed to get service out there. In addition, today I was riding around in a BMW, not because I particularly like that, but because there were a lot of drivers out there that were not on Hailo, that were driving private cars that wanted to be on Hailo, and so we've now extended our service to allow that. As of tomorrow, that's going to be selectable. Right now you just have to be luck of the draw when it comes to getting a free car upgrade to a private black car. Overall, the business is doing about $250 million in GMV run rate. We're just under 3 years old, so 1st of November 2011, and it's been an awfully wild ride. Of course, this industry is very dull and nobody's raising any money or doing anything, so we feel kind of alone, but other than that, I'm very happy to be here.
Fuck, wow. So take me back, where, like, pre-Hailo, who was Jay?
Yes. Well, not too different, but I probably slept a lot better. So anyway, I really was originally from New York, came to London to do what I thought would be a one-year master's at the London School of Economics. Life had other plans, started a business called eCourier in London, which was all about taking this really traditional industry, same-day delivery, guys delivering parcels on motorbikes, vans, etc., across the city, and trying to make it scalable and sexy through technology. This is about 2003. So it was I think it was one of the first companies to win the Mobile Computing Award of the British Computing Society. So it was a mobile business back in the day when there was no iPhone. We grew that into a pretty big business over a number of years. It was probably doing 10 million plus in revenue. Really crashed during the recession, had a lot of hard times. The whole world fell apart on us in about 08, 09, raising money in 09 from investors that actually imploded as we were trying to raise money from them, which is not a good position to be in if you can at all avoid it. So had both good times and bad times. It was a character building experience. I could probably buy Paddy that beer with what I made out of it, but at the same time we sold it to a trade buyer, got the business profitability, and then I really just was going on to the next thing, and so got the band back together with some of the executives and developers that I worked with and I liked to build Hailo. And Hailo was really all about trying to take the learnings and continue the experiences of trying to make life just easier and more efficient, and also to connect people and assets more efficiently in the physical world. We started out not really knowing what we were going to do. We knew we were going to do taxis. They were the big, kind of grown-up big brother of the same-day delivery industry, larger market, consumer market, regulated. Anyway, we found three cabbies, Terry, Russ, and Gary, three London cab drivers with a vision. And some proof behind them. And so we got together and they came up with this awesome idea that it was all about the supply side. That basically, if you focused intensely on the needs of the driver, if you built something and a suite of tools for them that they wanted to use independent of just giving them more trips, and you really, in your DNA, cared about them and their livelihoods, you could improve their efficiency rather than just creating a new network to destroy them. And so a great example of how I think technology often leads you to two roads. One is taking an existing industry and improving it. which can be harder, but the benefits are substantial, both socially and economically. And the other is just to kind of start from scratch, which we didn't really want to do. So that was the idea. That led to a couple of people on a boat outside or moored to the Thames in London, which was our first office, ironically. We playing credit card solitaire to fund the business, which is where you use the balances of one card to pay off the next, which I did a lot. And then finally got some money from some investors, Atomico, Wellington. Business launched in London in November, about 800 cars. Wasn't really sure whether it would work or not. Apple was telling us they were going to feature us, and I was really, in a fit, thinking we were just not going to be able to take all the demand, so caught between one thing and another. And it worked. And then it started working more. And so pretty soon we were in front of some other investors talking about how great our data was and how fast we were growing. And we raised another 17 million, and then we were in Ireland, and Ireland grew even faster than the UK for lots of different reasons, mostly because of the team that we had here. And then pretty soon I was sitting down with Richard Branson talking about the future of travel in a cafe in Soho, and then Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, and then after that raising some more money, and now even more after that. So it's been a kind of a wild ride, but I think the hardest thing has been, and the really thing that we've done I think the best, is no matter what, to try and focus on our real North Star, which is how do we create the best experience for drivers, and in doing so, create the best experience for customers, even when some things are happening in the industry that make it so that actually we're leading drivers where they might not really want to go themselves.
Fuck, it's been quite a good 3 years.
Yeah, I know.
So
I should be in the conference business.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people here, there's a lot of early stage
By
startups.
the way, I didn't get invited until last year.
Okay. This is a one-off invite. So growing along over 3 years, there's been, I'm sure you look back and you've got this kind of playbook of mistakes. And so for a lot of people in this room, they're starting out on that journey, or they're kind of thinking or contemplating about starting out on that journey. And one of the key things that I've just heard you touch on was all about investors. So a big challenge, I think in Dublin, there's lots of cash, but the challenge is, for the type of business
I heard about that.
The type of business you're building, there's a lot of money suddenly in Dublin. Is how do you find the right investor, and then how do you make that investor work for you effectively?
Right. Well, I mean, first of all is, to the extent that you can get by without investment, I would do it. Because in a lot of ways, the best investor for businesses at the very early stage is to have no investor. It's just easier, you have less people to answer to, less administration. But the thing is that businesses are growing so fast nowadays, you undoubtedly will need to take on additional capital in order to grow. I had a chat with the guys who founded Atlassian, which is Jira. A lot of you probably use it in development. They took no money to build their business before they did one round, I think, from Excel. And he said, look, we just couldn't do it today. That's not the way the world works. So you will probably have to, at one point, sit down and take capital. You may or may not have a choice of investors to work with. Should you be so lucky to have that choice, and I think there's a lot of things you can do, and we can talk about offline, to make that the case, then really your best investor is somebody that you want to pick up the phone to, and you want to talk through something that's really bad. Something that is happening that you don't know what to do about it, that you are not ashamed to basically say that things are not going right with this person or with this thing. And somebody who has the emotional intelligence and the operational experience and the investor experience that is on your side for this. And not just on your side and aligned in terms of making money, but actually wants you to succeed. Those people, unfortunately, are exceedingly rare. So I know a couple of them. I could talk about a couple of them. Toby Koppel, I think, is fantastic, who is one of our investors, who is now
So how do you do
fund,
due diligence? So how do you get to the point where you realize, okay, this person is somebody that I want to work with? How do you do due diligence? Reverse due diligence. They're doing due diligence.
Right. No, it's a good point. So, one of the interesting things that you realize about how the whole fund ecosystem works after a while is when you yourself are called upon to do diligence on new venture funds and your existing venture funds. So a lot of the conversations that I have nowadays are with limited partners. So limited partners are the guys that are putting money into venture funds. They're effectively the funders of venture funds that the venture funds have to answer to. They're very interesting people to talk to get perspective on on the whole thing in terms of how they work and what questions they ask. And actually, one of the things they're most concerned with is one of the things I think entrepreneurs should be most concerned with, which is what is the dynamic within the fund? What are the partners like? How do they know each other? How do they make decisions? Are they the kind of guys like Union Square Ventures that will go out on boating trips together and that know each other's families and that are small and talk about things and will go through hard times together? Or is it a large partnership where you have many different people who are going in and out and leaving, and potentially your guy or somebody else is going to be changed? Those are the kind of things that are important. Also, absolutely, what deals have they been involved in? And you got to look at the bad deals. The deals, anything that they don't want you to talk about, you got to find that person and talk about them.
So you got to find the founder of a company that got burned or didn't work out.
And usually it's a bad sign if people won't bring that up to begin with. Fred Wilson has a great adage where he says, if you want any information on me, here's a list of every entrepreneur I've ever worked with. Talk to any of them, they'll all say the same thing. And you know what? Good deals, bad deals, he's probably almost exactly right. But yeah, you're going to want to talk to people across the spectrum. And I'd also talk to people, if you can, that have worked with him on the investor side, because sometimes the way investors interact with one another and the relationships that they have with one another can be very important, because if your guy is not very well liked in the investor community, then when you go to raise your next round of funding, you're going to find, for reasons that have nothing to do with you, you may have some difficulty.
So let's just say everybody in this room isn't talking to Fred Wilson right now, and they're just talking to, an angel investor in Dublin.
Yeah.
Do the same kind of general rules apply, or how do you suss out a kind of a lone wolf type angel investor?
I have to be honest. I got to be really honest, which is in most of the businesses I've been involved with, which is all of two, there was a third that was an underwear business that I can talk about later if you want, but it didn't last very long, although it got me a lot of free underwear. So all the businesses I've been involved with, I never really had that much choice of investors until much later. And so the first thing I'll say is, don't be really upset if you don't have choice. However, there is always a stage where actually no investor is better than somebody who's giving you a check that is going to basically be highly destructive or controlling or otherwise impossible to deal with, or will ruin your chances of getting future money. In other words, you may choose starvation, literally, over basically going with somebody. So don't go with somebody just because you have to. Also, your due diligence may enable you to have a very frank conversation with the person that you're talking to say, look, this is some of the stuff that I found. This is some of the stuff that I've discovered talking to other people. I understand that basically, things may have changed and I may only get one perspective. Let's have an adult conversation about it. But let's also try and put some things in the shareholders agreement that protect ourselves against, potentially these kind of things happening if you're really saying that they won't reoccur. And the types of questions that you want to ask people are, basically how many investments do you have? How much capital do you have to invest? Really important question. If people, and where does that capital come from and how secure it is? If you take money from a very small fund and you're in a business like ours that appears not to be capital intensive and suddenly people are raising billions of dollars, then basically those guys are not going to be able to put in the follow-on capital they need to protect their stake and to keep the economics working. Also, if their fund is, for example, controlled by someone else, it's part of a hedge fund or some other thing and it falls apart, they may want their money back. They may not be able to get it back. And so you need to know what's behind the money and who's behind the money so that you can understand how valuable they're going to be. or whether they're just interested in investing in single investments and here's a check and that's pretty much you're on your way. But really, it's about track record and it's about personal relationships. You should due diligence everybody that you deal with personally and professionally, in the same way as you would someone you were hiring. You should talk to their colleagues, people they want you to talk to, as well as people that are just keep popping up that might not be on their list.
So let's say somebody cuts you a check then for 100 or 200K or 50K. I've listened to a lot of different entrepreneurs talk about their strategies for then keeping the investor engaged and getting the best out of them. What's your takeaway based on the whole range of investors that you've dealt with? How do you keep them kind of on your side and really putting in those extra hours for you and your company?
Well, first of all, I think that no capital is free both ways. But you have certain things to do which you would do anyway, which is try and build a great business that has a return. Investors, particularly the big name investors, their job is to help you. Your job is to get as much out of their particular network as possible, right? And you should not be ashamed at all to continue to hound them to do that in as many ways as you think is reasonable. And so, basically continually asking your board and your investors for help with certain things is the best way that you can keep them engaged. This is a problem that I'm having. I need someone who can help with this. We need to talk to an expert in performance marketing. Does anybody know anybody? Communication is a key thing, but also finding people that have, and the bigger venture funds or even smaller venture funds that are very well regarded can get you those people are really going to be the ones that are prized and the ones that really help you get out of really sticky business situations.
And do you advise, a lot of entrepreneurs share weekly or monthly kind of updates with whoever their investors are at whatever stage. Is that something that...
We've had the worst fucking update process for shareholders that I could possibly imagine. Honestly, it's appallingly bad. It's totally embarrassing. We have some great Russian investors who I really like, who I'd recommend to anybody. They're called Fenomen. And Dmitry always calls me to say, what's the update, what's going on? And I spend an hour on the phone with him talking, and he's very, very interesting and always very, very engaging. But he always complains that we don't yet have a kind of something that we send out to people. I wouldn't waste too much time on it. It's obviously not the end of the world, but it is good practice, and particularly now as we have a CFO, we're hopefully going to be doing more of that. I think the key things that you should send out are very high level, what's going on with the business, what's going on with numbers, and what you're doing. The second and most important part is, here are the problems we're struggling with, and here are the ways that we need help. Is there any way you can do that? Although keeping the investor base small enough so that you can do that one-to-one, I think is probably even a better thing. Okay. And that's generally what I'm doing with the investors that I know care about,
So
updates like that.
So switching gears then from investors to this other thing, then you build a product and you need users or customers. You've scaled a business very, very fast. You've layered on hundreds of people, and as you do that, you become, I think a lot of CEOs and founders can end up stepping away from the kind of cold face. Right. I'm sure you've made a few mistakes along the way.
Oh, totally.
Can you kind of talk to that?
Yeah, well, so in the beginning, when we were first launching, I was kind of maniacal about this. So we used Desk.com. It used to be called Assistly. It's part of Salesforce now. It's this customer support product. And literally, I would look at that thing all the time just to see what people were saying, what kind of cases we're going through, and occasionally I'd talk to people. And I actually allocated an hour a week to talk to people, when the scale of the business permitted that to happen. And I really enjoyed that. And I loved when the really, really tough cases, the really, really big, crazy cases, came back to me because it was an opportunity to learn and keep an eye out for what was going on. Anytime I talk to our business support team, which are the people that basically talk directly to customers, it's like customer support, they tend to get really, really, kind of burnt out after a while. And you've got to keep reminding these guys that these guys are essential. They're the front lines. They're the eyes and ears of the network. What they're doing is probably the most critical function in the entire business. They need to be consistently alert for patterns and other things that are going on. Anyway, talk about screw-ups.
Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of try and direct you towards something because, so I see this big divide in the kind of tech world where you have I'm not going to say the lean startup movement per se, but you have a whole load of kind of purveyors of an idea that data is God, and that you should follow what the data says. So you're doing MVPs, and then you're constantly iterating based on kind of real-time customer feedback through A/B testing or multivariate testing or whatever you do. And then on the other side, you'll meet these kind of entrepreneurs, and you could say maybe almost Steve Jobs was an example of that, and tons of other people who are like, fuck the data, I'm just going to go with my gut on this one. And sometimes these people manage to build great companies as well. So I'm just wondering, you know, like where do you stand? What are the lessons?
So we hired probably more people from Zynga than almost any other place. Mark Pincus has a very famous tweet. He was the CEO of Zynga and founder of Zynga. He was a very smart guy who said, data never lies, but it often tells the wrong truths. That's an important statement to take in for a second. So Zynga was an exceedingly data-focused business where basically it started to become so data-focused that the data was leading them to not be able to figure out what the difference was between the noise and what the data was measuring. But it also did some incredible things, so I can't discount it at all. We fell into a similar trap when about last year, about this time, maybe a little bit later, we recognized, and I just brought in a great PhD data scientist from Google who was building a team out, that basically our supply was growing at a really great rate, so our number of taxis, number of trips that they were taking, but our demand was skyrocketing. People were just using the service, they were using it more. This shift in consumer behavior was happening at an unspeakable rate. And we recognized that there was going to be, particularly with the Christmas period, when you have this clash where a lot of people are using taxis generally, and taxis are very full, and a lot of people will be using, Hailo, that actually we were not going to have enough capacity to meet demand. And by the numbers we were looking at, it was going to get really bad. So we needed to put something in place that did two things simultaneously. One is we needed to manage yield, so effectively we needed to basically quell demand a little bit in the nicest possible way, so the only people who really wanted taxis would ask for them. And the second one was we needed to make it more attractive for people, for drivers, to accept Hailo trips, even when they might have a target-rich opportunity of other people on the street, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The way in which we decided to do that was a very brutal, I think, way that I think in retrospect we probably could have thought a lot more about. And it wasn't really the data that was the genesis of that. It was our interpretation of the data and what we decided to do and could do at the product level. These things were always different in hindsight. So we put in this minimum fare. So we basically said, look, every night between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. and every weekend, minimum fare in London would be 10 or 15 pounds. Okay, so the minute that you kind of press that you want a taxi, you're in for 10 or 15 pounds, regardless of whether you're going around the corner or you're. Now the fact is, our analysis basically said very simply, our minimum fare is like closer to 20 pounds. So this is not really going to affect very many people because it's just basically codifying a rule that exists or a behavior that exists already. Really, the biggest impact should be in the minds of the drivers, where it will give them assurance that actually they're not going to get that one or two trips that are just basically somebody using it to go across the street, and therefore they get very upset because they've run some time and wasted some time in order to get the customer to do that. So we put in this minimum fare, and I guess I'll tell you how disastrous it was in terms of our customer relations. The drivers liked it, and supply did go up. Errol Damelin, who was the CEO of Wanga, who was a good friend and actually a very good guy, said to me, "Thank you very much for last December because you got me off the hook from being the most hated entrepreneur in the UK." And so indeed, there was a lot of flack from the minimum fare escapade, and we learned a lot from it. What I also learned was the importance of talking to customers. So the people who were most pissed off about the minimum fare were the people that could afford it. So pretty much all of the who's who of really rich and influential people in the UK were going to the papers, the Evening Standard, and kind of vilifying us because they loved the service so much, but they couldn't understand why we're doing this. So I asked the customer service team for a list of the top 10 or 15 people that was was doing this. And it would be like Alexandra Schulman, who is the editor of Condé Nast in the UK. And I basically would call them up and I would say, hey, look, I'm Jay, and I just want to introduce myself and say I'm really sorry about the experience you've had, and the Evening Standard has basically chosen to reprint verbatim. But basically, I'd love to talk to you about what's behind your emotion and point of view about this, because we really do want to listen and change. And that got me a couple of really interesting meetings, one of which was with Alexandra, which actually led to, among other things, not only a greater understanding of why people were upset by that, but also apparently a Tatler piece that is out this month for anybody who reads Tatler in the UK, because that's a Condé Nast publication. So good things can come, although I haven't read the piece yet.
It's a real favorite amongst programmers.
I can imagine. Yes. Apparently, the readership is basically mostly women in the UK with an average income of above £160,000. So it's quite a unique niche that they occupy. Nevertheless. But yeah, the importance of it is talking to your customers early and often, and probably before you make major changes, is a really good thing to do if you can.
So one more question before we open it up, and it's, a lot of early stage startups, especially kind of mobile apps in particular, come about as a consequence of maybe kind of one programmer coming together and just building an interesting product. But building is increasingly the easy part.
Right.
The harder part is, I think, in a world where there's millions of apps across all of the app stores, is actually getting noticed and marketing.
Yeah.
So, I'm just wondering from the J playbook if there's any kind of lessons, and I know you mentor and also invest in a lot of early stage startups. So I'm just kind of wondering, there's tons of early stage startups here. What are the kind of 2 or 3 rules that you think people need to be thinking about early on as they're building their product?
Well, I think that the number one thing is not to underestimate it. Not to underestimate basically, one, how much competition there is for mind share in any of the app stores. Number 2 is not to basically believe that people have more time or energy to invest in your product than they do. People are busy. People have very, very little time to basically dedicate towards learning something new or doing something new or even doing something more efficiently, all right? Because we've all got so much going on in our own lives. And then the third thing is, just share an anecdote. I was having breakfast in Silicon Valley recently with probably one of the most esteemed venture capitalists of all time. And we were discussing this very topic. And his point was, it seems to me that in the app world, that these apps that are really successful, it seems that they just manage to strike some chord with some basic human need or human emotion or something about people that makes them unbelievably successful at the consumer channel. And then that builds on itself and builds on itself and builds on itself. But if you ask them, and in their heart of hearts, the CEOs, how did they do it? They would probably all tell you, we have no idea. It was a total fucking accident. But when we found it, we amped it because we want, and the examples were Twitter, Airbnb, Uber is a great example of it. Hopefully not in Ireland, but really, things that are that viral and that grow that quickly are usually things that are completely unpredictable. And so the challenge is, can you try new things enough to be able to see if you can strike that chord, knowing that basically the odds of finding it are very low and the odds of hitting it on the first run are almost zero.
So are you suggesting that people should focus more on just building small, little, quick products and seeing if it sticks than kind of spending 2 years building the most awesome app in the world that nobody uses?
I would definitely not do the latter, and I would probably not do the former either, but it's somewhere in between. I think that the key is, look, it's all about traction. It's all about, can you get people to take time to use your application? In two-sided marketplaces like the one that we operate in, it's, can you build value to one side of the marketplace to get the other engaged? Is it a big enough market? All these other kind of things that come on later. But I think the main thing that I would think about is, Is the problem that I'm solving really that important? And if I solved it, what would the impact on people's lives be? You know, when we started out as a company, I had tons of people say to me, there is not a chance that people like Excel or Union Square Ventures will ever invest in your company because it's just a taxi business. As I sit here now, not being arrogant, but I could not think of, and it cuts both ways, a hotter sector in technology than basically the e-hail, on-demand, personal transportation application. It is totally unpredictable what happens with your market. And so, I would also say that this is why the entrepreneurs that I respect the most, and you probably do too, people like, Branson, will just admit that basically sometimes it just doesn't work because of timing or because of other things, best intentions in the world. Virgin Cola was great, but it just didn't work. And that's okay because sometimes things don't. And really it's about how you judge your success on the long haul that matters, and not just by any individual project. So keep at it.
Great. Jay, thank you very much.